All right, guys, we need to have a chat about dialogue because dialogue is the lifeblood of a narrative. So by the end of this lesson, you guys are going to be able to define what dialogue is, list and define the components of dialogue, and list and follow the rules of dialogue, punctuation, and formatting. So your keywords are obviously dialogue, and the components, including a tag, and the spoken word, and punctuation and formatting, focusing on comma usage, end punctuation, quotation marks, and paragraph breaks. So let's talk, which is exactly what dialogue is. Dialogue is a conversation, and in narratives, having conversations can help with character development, provide an avenue for sensory description, break up descriptive passages, help an author show something instead of tell something, and move the plot line forward. All of these things are important to making a story interesting because otherwise you might as well be writing like the Charlie Brown teacher talks. Wah, 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 wah. So, basically a good conversation does a lot to make a good story better. And we can see that when we look at how this little passage shows character development. Yes, I mumbled, what's the bet? I bet that I could beat him in the snowshoe race in first grade Winter Olympics. Ha ha ha, Susie laughed hysterically. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. What's so funny about it? You've never even been on snowshoes. Boom. We know that this character has never been on snowshoes. This tells us they are an impulsive sort of person because they bet something that they couldn't really back up, and that they've never had this kind of skill, so that this is kind of a man versus self conflict, etc., etc. We also see some sensory description. Mumbled tells us what this character's voice is sounding like. Instead of, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, you know, whatever else is going on here. We get sensory detail. We get it with what Susie's saying, ha, ha, ha. If she had snorted, we'd have another one. We get what he's seeing. She was laughing so hard, I thought she was going to fall out of her chair, etc. And we see some plot development. So you expect to race the biggest, toughest kid in the first grade and win when you don't even know how to put the snowshoes on? Ha, ha, ha. Okay, plot line. We have a conflict, ladies and gentlemen, and that means our story's going somewhere. All of that came out of conversation. So let's talk about what goes into dialogue. Here we have just a basic sentence. What do you think you're doing? He demanded gruffly, his eyes narrowed. This sentence actually shows us a lot about dialogue because it shows us the two parts that are in dialogue. First up is the spoken word. This is the part that goes in quotation marks, and it's what the character is saying. Next, and just as important, is the tag. It tells your reader who is speaking and how they are speaking. The tag offers a lot of sensory details, and it gives you a lot of ways to show things instead of tell them, because he demanded gruffly, his eyes narrowed, tells us both what this character is looking like and what he's sounding like, and we could have him stacking things on the counter or something else that shows what he's doing and gives us a lot of characterization in just a simple phrase. So, two parts, the spoken part, what they're saying, and the tag, who is saying it and how. Which means we need to follow some rules now. Number one, commas. Commas are extremely important in dialogue. We use commas to separate the tags from the spoken word, and we also use commas to replace periods at the end of a spoken sentence if the tag comes afterwards. So basically, if your tag comes first, right after your tag, you'll have a comma, then you'll have your spoken part. If the tag comes in the middle, you'll have a comma on the inside of one set of quotation marks, and then a comma after the tag before you start the next set of quotation marks. And if you have a tag at the end of your spoken sentence, you'll have a comma inside the quotation marks instead of end punctuation, and you will then continue with your tag to finish your sentence. So commas separate tags from the spoken word. End punctuation. Dialogue sentences are kind of like a sentence within the sentence. So the overall sentence needs end punctuation, and the spoken sentence needs end punctuation. The big thing here is that you're going to punctuate the spoken sentence exactly like you would punctuate any other sentence. If it's an exclamation, you use an exclamation point. If it's a question, you'll use a question mark. And if it's a period, you'll use a period, unless the tag comes after the spoken part, in which case you'd replace that period with a comma and then follow with the tag. All of the punctuation that goes to the spoken sentence needs to go inside the quotation marks. If your tag comes at the end of a sentence, you need to put a period after the tag to also end the total sentence that the dialogue is in. And I've mentioned these lots now. We need to use quotation marks. These are used around all the words that are spoken by a character so that we know that these are the words that are coming out of their mouth. Double quotes. And last, paragraph breaks. I've seen some of your writing, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the one rule that you are definitely not following. Every time you have a new speaker or they start talking about a new idea, you guys need to change paragraphs. Even if the last speaker only said one thing, change paragraphs. Every time. So looking at some dialogue rules and punctuation, we go back to our little passage about the really silly bet for the snowshoe race in the first grade Winter Olympics. And we see that we have speaker number 1 who is telling his friend Susie that he made a bet, and he mumbles yes, and then we change paragraphs. And she asks, what's the bet? And we see that there's a quotation mark, just inside those sorry, I'm tripping over my own tongue. There's a question mark inside those quotations up here. So, first, yes, I mumbled, change paragraphs, new speaker, what's the bet? Question mark inside the quotation marks. We can also look back up here and we see where they have separated the tag with a comma. Comma's on the inside of the quotation marks because the tag's coming after it, so this goes with the spoken part. And we go on and on, lots of paragraph changing, quotation marks around the parts that are being said, and commas to separate tags, etc. So, what this all comes down to is that dialogue is the lifeblood of an interesting story. It develops character, it drives plot, it keeps the story from getting boring, so you've got to use it. If you're struggling for your word count in NaNoWriMo right now, have a conversation, and remember to use quotation marks, commas, and punctuation, and change your paragraphs.